Welcome to Nation. I'm Karen Pugliese. Now, many of us have been watching democratic institutions just erode south of the border. Russia offers a sobering lesson. After a brief move towards democracy under perestroika, freedoms were slowly rolled back when Vladimir Putin came to power in 1999. Today in Russia, a free press does not exist, and indigenous climate activists like Daria Agariva have been jailed for speaking out. Cultural Survival, an NGO that monitors indigenous rights globally, is calling for her release. Why are people who lived through Russia's backslide sounding the alarm now about the United States? We're going to talk to an indigenous activist who fled the country, but first I'm joined by Russian journalist Pavel Kanygin, who left the country when it was no longer safe to report and now runs an independent platform from abroad. Welcome to the show, Pasha.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Karen.
Oh, why did you want to be a journalist in Russia? I mean, it doesn't sound like it was always very safe.
Russia was a completely different country back in the days. It had nothing to do with the Soviet Union, and I mean the Russia that I was born into, that I was raised, was a part of the European family. Yes, it was like the economy was struggling. There were a lot of poor people on the streets. But the direction that the country was moving to was right. And like democracy was not just simple words. So it was something that everyone could see, and everyone could just benefit from. I mean, the society, and people, institutions, etc. So, and it was okay to become a journalist. It was quite safe. Many young people of my age thought that it's a very good career to proceed. We had some examples uh, in front of our eyes, and they exercised their freedom of speech, and they did it. Like wonderfully. Of course, there were like murders, and killings and other unpleasant stuff happening to people and to journalists. But it didn't stop, it didn't stop young professionals from becoming journalists. Uh, but it wasn't that deadly as we see it's unfolding now, right?
So then what changed? It rolled back. Was all because of Vladimir Putin?
Yes, everything started changing like slowly, gradually, when Vladimir Putin came to power, like in 2000s. But it was very slow, as they say, they kind of did. He boiled this frog on a very slow fire, right? Uh, and the society itself uh, just wasn't able to notice that the democracy was waning, that Vladimir Putin was weakening every institution in our country, every young and unstable institution, because he managed to control state television first, and then commercial networks, then radio stations, finally magazines. Within like a span of 10 years, 10 years, he was able to control every significant institution in media field in Russia. It was nothing compared to what we have right now uh, in Russia. When no one is allowed to criticize the government, if you but and if you do, you might be jailed, straight away.
I was watching the movie of Caravan and Dogs, and it features a news organization that you used to work for. And they were talking about just how the government uh, clamped down by making certain words illegal. I mean, I would have thought
Yeah.
that in that kind of state, what we would see is we'd see, police just running in with guns and shooting journalists or throwing them into jail. But it's much more subtle than that. Can you tell me a little bit about how that worked?
If you want to run a newspaper or a network or like a radio station or something, or just a big blog, um, you are not allowed to investigate into Putin's family first. And the second rule, it's not official. It's not official. You know, you were just supposed not to cover those topics. So family of Vladimir Putin, absolutely no go. And the second, uh, you have to admit that the Crimea annexation was lawful. See what I mean? So those two rules were like a golden rules. Um, uh, and everything else was absolutely allowed, you know. But when the war started, of course, the amount, the scale of those restrictions and limits became really insane. No journalist allowed to use like this term war. You know, you can't just say write or pronounce it. You know, or broadcast it. Otherwise, you might be fined. You know, we have this great book by Leo Tolstoy, right? So and we are not allowed to to use the name of that book anymore because there were examples when young people were protesting on the streets, protesting against the war, and they were protesting with this book, as the like instead of all these placards, they used the book, used the book by Leo Tolstoy, and even that was considered a crime.
I just have to remark on something that you just said, because I think our idea in the West would be if somebody was out protesting and then they did something that clever and then they were arrested, that that would be the end of it. They actually went to the court. So the court systems were also very much controlled by the government.
Absolutely. Everything is controlled by the government. In this sense, the Russian system is absolutely corrupt. They're all afraid of being regarded as uh, disloyal to the government, to Vladimir Putin. This fear is everywhere in the system.
Okay, we're going to take a pause there. When we come back, why Pasha says we should be more worried about what we're seeing in the US. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. I'm here with Russian journalist Pavel Kanygin. And in light of all we're seeing in the US, we're talking about what happens when states lose their democracy. You ended up leaving Russia. You had to leave. Tell me about why you left.
I didn't see other choices because I felt that if I had stayed, I would have uh, I would have had like a consequences. I would have seen like a maybe immediate punishment. For what I had already done in my career. Because now they punish journalists and human rights activists not only for what they have done regarding the war, but what they had done back in the days, long before that, in 2015, 2016, someone said something, someone wrote something on social media, someone had some strange photo with European colleagues or with European officials, with European militaries, and now he or she is considered like a traitor for that kind of stuff. So it's really crazy. And at that moment, I understood that, I would like to keep my to preserve my capacity, my professional capacity, and I need to continue, my work somehow.
Tell us
And
about your platform, what you're doing now.
so this is the YouTube channel, but of course we collect information from our sources, uh, who are in Russia and abroad. They don't have like legal ways to speak up, without being punished. So that's why we have this like a vehicle, the YouTube channel, and me as a vehicle, for many people to speak up and to tell the truth. And but I hope that someday it will change. I hope so.
We're in Canada and we're looking at what's happening down in the US. I'm wondering, what are you seeing in the US right now that may seem familiar to you?
Everything is very familiar to me, but the funny thing is that for Vladimir Putin and for Putin's Russia, it took them like 20 something years to achieve what they eventually achieved, right? So I mean, shutting down the every institution working for the society, shutting down media and control media over media, control over court and judges, etc., etc. uh, you know but in the US it's happening even quicker, even faster, in a more aggressive way. And for Donald Trump, it seems like 1 year is enough, right? Yes, there are a lot of protests on the streets, like in Minneapolis, in California. There are some. Uh, there are some turmoil in Congress, but it's not enough as we see it. Trump has such a strong support among his constituency that he's able to do what he wants, actually, and that is exactly what Vladimir Putin used to instill, still has, right?
Pasha, do you think that Canada should be worried about the threats coming from Donald Trump?
I think it's better to be prepared for every turn possible, because it's very unpredictable when you have a world where there are like such uh, daring, audacious personalities as the Russian president, the American president, and so yes, I think you should be just prepared to every turn possible. But I think that in a couple of years, in 3 years, by the way, actually, when he's done, I think maybe we all say that, yeah, what a story.
And be prepared in case he
Yeah,
actually doesn't leave. But Pasha, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate all your insights.
thank you, Karen. Thank you for having me.
After the break, we'll talk to Luda Kinok, a Yupik woman from the indigenous community of Synerika in Chukotka, Russia. Welcome back. Under the Soviet Union, Indigenous rights were not recognized. While recognition of land rights have been hard won here, it was not even until under Perestroika that Indigenous people could speak about rights. For a brief time, it was safe, and then it wasn't. Joining me now is Luda Kinok, an Inuk woman from the Indigenous community of Syneriki in Chukotka, Russia. Welcome. Luda, thank you for being here. Now, I understand there was no recognition of rights under the Soviet regime, but did things improve for Indigenous people in Russia with Perestroika?
Yeah, so during Perestroika, the real change did reach us as Yupik people. For example, like the major one in 1989, when Gorbachev and Reagan signed a visa-free agreement. The Bering Strait that separated us reopened, and the family that haven't seen each other since the Cold War started were finally reunited. My grandma was reunited with her first cousins. So we probably were the only indigenous group in post-USSR that didn't require passports and visa to travel to United States. So that moment felt like healing when border opened, and something also opened inside of us as well. So, but for years before that, we existed only mostly like a stereotype, a tundra man in Soviet jokes. Suddenly it was acceptable or even fashionable to be, they still call us Eskimo. Visibility, replaced silence. And but it still came late, and it still came on someone else's terms. So we understood limits. Cultural expression didn't mean land rights, political power, or self-determination. Glassness, which is freedom of speech, exposed truth of the system. So once people could speak, many spoke against it, and those who demanded real autonomy, like Chechnya. So perestroika it brought us reunions and visibility, but not so much protection. We learned that recognition without power can vanish quickly, even in a time as reform, that called reforms. Yeah.
What happened to freedoms and rights of indigenous people under Vladimir Putin?
His appointment marked the moment when power was re-centralized. So the chaos of 1990s was replaced by a new system of control. Decisions were made above us, not with local or indigenous consent. For Yupik communities, rights existed mostly on paper. Independent organizing narrowed, land and sources decision moved further away from us, and dissent was increasingly treated as a security issue. So while Abramovich time brought material support, it also signaled the start of an era where our survival depended on loyalty to centralized power rather than on freedom, self-determination, or protected indigenous rights. I hope I made sense.
Oh, why did you move? What made you feel unsafe there?
Well, just to be born on the border of a Cold War as full-blooded indigenous person was already a statement without me knowing. We were always under constant surveilling. At 16, during that collapse, somehow, some way, I became a Christian minister, evangelical minister. And that brought more attention on me, more surveillance. I used visa-free travel and travel back and forth, but after a while, I made a full decision to come back home full time. I wanted to be reunited with my family and stay there. And I was able to stay for about 2 years. And just sometimes to travel from one destination to the other by airplane, I had an escort, an actual FSB, used to be KGB officer, as a marshal sitting next to me. My traveling was restricted, and I was able to put up with it because I grew up under such pressure. But when my best friend confessed to me, basically saying, Luda, for the past 2 years, I've been reporting to the local office, FSB office, every day about your life, what you ate, who visited you, all the details of my life. And that hurt. But then I found out that dozens of my family and friends were actually asked for questioning. So then I decided it's probably best for them, best for people that I love, that I'm not there with them. So I I had to move. I left.
Why were they interrogating your friends and family? Were they getting ready to arrest you?
Yes, eventually.
How did the war in the Ukraine impact Yupik people?
It's a, yeah. So war in Ukraine has deeply affected us as Yupik people, even though it's far from us. From our small villages in Chukotka, the disproportionate number of young men were mobilized and called to serve in war that has nothing to do with us. In the first wave of the draft, those taken from our villages were only Indigenous people. And I know personally one single mother lost all three of her sons to the first draft wave. For a people as small as us, losses like this have lasting effects on families and on the future in our communities. So it's a very touchy topic because it's still ongoing.
So, based on what you've seen in Russia, I'm wondering if there's things that you're seeing in the US that just look familiar to you.
Yes, I do recognize like what should I call it? Like early warning signs. Signs. I say it carefully, and I'm saying it from the lived experience. What we lived through began with militarization, justified as security, then economic dependence on the state, and later the quiet erosion of rights that were said to be protected by law. In Chukotka, indigenous lands were turned into strategic territory without consent. Dissent was framed as threat. The decisions about our future were made 4,000 miles away from us. When the system collapsed, we were abandoned. Then power returned under Putin. Rights existed mostly on paper, while control tightened in practice. In United States today, I see warning signs when indigenous land is treated primarily as a resource or a security zone, when peaceful land defenders are criminalized, then treaties are questioned, and when indigenous voices are sidelined in decisions that affect their own territories. History taught us that rights don't disappear overnight. They're narrowed step by step, often in the name of stability or protection. That's why paying attention early matters.
Thank you so much for talking to me today.
I do appreciate this opportunity to speak. Yeah.
And that is your Nation to Nation for this week. APTN is a charity, and if you like our journalism, you can support it. Check out our website, aptnnews.ca, to find out how. We'll continue this conversation next week on Nation to Nation and bring it a little closer to home. We have a team that's going to take us to hotspots in the United States and show us why some Indigenous people, including those taking part in protests against ICE, are raising concerns with what they're seeing unfold. I'll see you next week.